Good evening, listeners. It's time to settle in for another chilling story of suburban suspense. From the slumbering heads of Mount Rushmore to the twin and windy cities. From the unseen depths of the Great Lakes to the rustling husks of cornfields across the heartland. Who knows what ghouls and crawling creatures lurk among us under the Midwest moon?
Two astronauts returned to Earth from a spaceflight in 1966, the last in a series of missions for Project Gemini. They had been sent into orbit to test docking and other techniques needed for journeys to the moon. This mission lasted just 9 days, but both of the astronauts returned markedly different men. In their first days readjusting to Earth, one man craved the intense solitude he had experienced while on the rocket, soundproofing the den of his home and wearing earplugs wherever he went. He all but stopped talking to his wife. The other? He went a different direction. The man spent full days in the food court at the mall near his home, desperate to be surrounded by others. He didn't read. He didn't eat. He just sat in the food court, grateful for the claustrophobic crowd, shopping and laughing and pressing in. Many wondered what brought about the extreme and opposite reactions. Was the stint in total isolation to blame? Or did something happen when they were up there? An alien encounter not relayed back to Earth? A brush with some inhuman entity that would explain the mission's mysterious lack of radio communication? Miles away and years afterward, Carly Strobe read the story of the two astronauts when she was 10. She pictured the second astronaut at her neighborhood mall, still in his spacesuit, the light from the Orange Julius sign reflecting off his helmet. For whatever reason, the account of the two astronauts stayed with Carly as she grew up. Throughout adolescence and into young adulthood, she felt a kinship with the astronaut who retreated to silence. She too craved quiet and savored every solo bike ride or afternoon to herself, loving any chance to be left alone with her thoughts. That changed last summer.
Have you made contact with the impossible? Had an encounter that can't be explained? Together, we'll explore the monsters that surround us, all that is alien and unknowable. When no one else believes, I'm here. You're not alone. I'm your friend, Calvin Raskin, and this is De-Hoaxing Ghosts. We've all heard the story of the last of the Gemini astronauts, the pair who returned from their mission different men. Our guest today, Carly Strobe, believes she shares a connection with these astronauts. Carly, thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Cal.
Now, you first heard about the final Gemini mission in a library book, is that right?
When I was a little girl.
You told me earlier that you're not a history buff. Were you a space nerd as a kid?
No, not particularly. I just latched onto the story for some reason. Obsessed, really. I couldn't stop thinking about the astronauts. Daydreaming, kind of.
What would you imagine?
I'd think about the first astronaut sitting alone, watching television without the sound. And I'd picture the other in the food court at my own mall, still in his spacesuit, trying to pick up a soft pretzel with his massive gloves.
The story stuck with Carly as she grew up, as if she was tethered to the men, the second astronaut in particular. She'd always felt a twin impulse to escape and isolate. That is, until last summer. Carly visited a lake on the first truly hot day of June, taking a hike to kick off the season. She parked near the water and set off for what she thought would be a half-day trek.
From my car, the lake looked compact, like a perfect oval. That's how it looked on my map, too. But when I started hiking, I found out it was shaped more like a sunburst, with a bunch of stretches of water reaching out into the trees.
You ventured out anyway.
I did. For hours, I hiked each crooked finger of water that stretched toward the woods, but no matter how much time passed or how fast I moved, I stayed opposite my car across the water. I'd huff around another bend to find out I wasn't any closer than when I started. Pretty soon, the sun dropped below the trees, and the fishermen across the water all packed up and drove off.
And you panicked.
I did. It was like a fever rash, the fear that crept up my neck. I was completely alone on the trail, but I spotted 2 kayakers on the water, pretty far out, and I tied my jacket to the end of a stick and waved it overhead, shouting to them. I yelled myself hoarse, but they couldn't hear me. Eventually I gave up. My throat was so raw. I was crouched over in this defeated heap. I thought for sure I'd have to stay the night there. And as I'm spiraling, I see this sign. There were a few along the trail that said, "You're never alone at Rampart Reservoir." It meant park rangers were always around to help if needed, but to me the message read differently, almost as a threat, especially...
Yes?
Well, all day, even though I was alone, I had this visceral sense of a presence in the trees. Someone I could feel but couldn't see. And then suddenly, a branch snapped behind me, and I shot up and wheeled around. And I felt this jolt of terror so real that my fear was like a shadow figure beside me. All around me was black, just thick trees, and I strained my eyes, but I couldn't see anything. All I caught was a flash of silver-white light, and then all at once, I felt this intense hunger that didn't make sense for having only gone since breakfast without eating. My thirst was weirdly urgent, too.
From anxiety, maybe? All the adrenaline?
I thought that, but there was something else. I started to picture myself stranded on a remote planet separate from every other living soul, with nothing but pale rock in every direction around me. The thought called up a scream deeper and louder than I thought possible. I watched then as the pair of kayakers turned in the water and started moving in my direction.
Wow.
Yeah, I just collapsed to the ground. I was so relieved. When the kayakers got to me, they offered to take me across the lake to my car. It was the quickest yes I've ever said.
But something happened as you crossed the lake.
I was soaking up the company and just glad to finally be making progress toward my car when one of the guys mentioned it being the pair's last hurrah before heading back to college. They had class the next day, but it was June. I asked why so early, and he laughed. I wouldn't call September early, he said. And all of a sudden, the breeze on the water felt chilled, and that's when I noticed dark leaves whipping across the shore. The picture of fall.
That was your lost summer.
That's what I call it. All 3 months, just gone.
How did you make sense of it?
I couldn't. I didn't. I'm still trying to reconcile it.
And you think something alien was at play? Somehow related to what the Gemini astronauts experienced?
I do.
Okay. Well, how do you make that leap?
The image of being alone on a remote planet. That expanse of rock in every direction and the quick, intense hunger and thirst. That was exactly what both astronauts said happened to them. They each described experiencing the same vision and sensations after returning to Earth from their flight, right down to the silver light.
Now, not to dismiss your theory, but you'd read their accounts often before that hike. Isn't it likely your brain just called up the memory at that moment?
No.
No?
It wasn't like I was thinking on my own. The image felt projected onto me. That's the closest way I can describe it. Like, the thought was given to me more than I came up with it myself.
Okay, a lot to unpack there. I have more questions about that, but let's fast forward. You get out of there that night, you make it back home, shaken, I'm sure. Then what?
I changed a lot of my life up, my routine. When I finally left my house again, I rerouted my nature walks to a short loop downtown. I gave up night hikes completely. Right away, I quit my gig as an outdoor guide and got a job at the Great Outside Shop, which is nice. I can park right by the door, and there are always customers and coworkers around.
Except Thursdays.
How?
Oh, team calendar. Your boss let me peek.
Oh, yeah, I solo close most Thursdays, but try not to if I can help it.
Solo shifts aside, you like the job?
The shop is great. I get to help people plan their trips and stay up on camping and everything I love, but, safely.
No stakes.
Right.
We're actually recording this episode from the Great Outside Shop, and I've got to say, you do feel tucked away in here, like we're in a cabin out in the woods, all the exposed rock and lamplight.
Oak shelves all the way around, yeah.
Honestly, if it weren't for the windows, you'd never guess we were in the city.
Right? That map behind you is a watercolor of the whole city. My boss likes to point out the store at the bottom. We're on the very edge of downtown, right where the gray and green of concrete and trees bleed into each other.
So downtown, I get. Rush hour, I get. What's the story with all the crowds down this street tonight? I can't find a space to save my life.
So we're right next to a parking garage, and a couple weeks ago, an artist painted this giant mural on top of the garage. I bet you've seen it. It's been covered all over. In huge letters he wrote, "Don't fly over us, land here." It's a nod to us being a dot in Flyover Country. Kind of like a gag for plane passengers coming in to land nearby. Anyway, it's gotten a lot of attention. Brought more people to the block. To the shop?
I'll be honest, I don't get that.
Get what?
The flyover complex. You choose to live in the boondocks, but then you get bored and you want attention. Once you get it, though, it's not what you thought. Too many tourists, no parking. Like women want to be noticed, want to be approached, but then they can't stomach any interest they get.
That's a weird analogy.
It's true. Anyway, you don't mind the crowds? Everybody flocking so close?
No.
You prefer crowds to being alone.
I do. I can't be alone.
Not anymore.
No, not anymore.
Well, the street's packed outside, but there are no customers in here.
No.
So, we're alone.
I guess.
That doesn't scare you? Make you anxious?
Well, two's not really alone.
Not if you trust the other. Do you trust me?
Sure.
But you don't know me.
I don't?
Do you?
Well, I listened to your show.
Right. You told me it's a favorite. I just mean we don't know each other. I'm in your car or your living room or your ears when you're out running. And that feels intimate. I get it. Like we're having a conversation. And I share a lot on the show. But we don't know each other. What if you're a conspiracy theorist? Or some crazed fangirl, you know? Or what if I'm a bad person and you have something I want?
What?
What if I'm casing the place?
What, to rob me?
$3.50 for hiking boots is a joke. What if I want the boots but don't want to pay? So I ask my friend to wait in a van out back. Just a couple armfuls and I'll be out of your hair. I'm kidding. Hey, relax. Come on. I don't want anything. I'm just enjoying my time alone with you. Lucky for me, I got you on a Thursday. All right. Getting back to it. The store. You think it's a good fit?
Well, I'm still, finding my footing, but yes, I like it.
Okay, so I can edit out whatever I need for this episode, but I can't edit your voice. It's gonna come through if you sound scared, okay? It's such a good story. I don't want to scrap it because I made a stupid joke and made it weird, all right?
For a tense moment, it seemed the host might grab Carly. He leaned closer to her, and she drew back. Instinctive reflex. The charged uncertainty stretched between them for several breaths before it was interrupted by a sudden pinwheel of light out the window, then the sound of rushing wind. Carly was caught between the sound and the podcast host. Finally, she broke his invisible hold and moved to look out the window, peering up at the blinking lights. While she was still looking out, a loud bang shook the store's back door.
Someone's trying to get in! Come here!
The host motioned for Carly to hide with him behind the front counter. She hesitated, not sure if it was a ploy. More banging hammered at the back of the store.
Come on! I've got us!
The host grabbed Carly's arm. She flinched at his touch and took a step back. He scoffed, hands up in mock surrender, and walked away toward a shelf of supplies. After a beat, Carly lunged for her jacket hanging on the chair to search its pocket, pulling out bear spray. Then she reached for a hatchet on the wall, straining to loosen it from its display hooks, and turned to find the host right behind her. He was holding a length of climbing rope and stepped even closer to her.
To tie him up if we need, until the police get here.
When did you call?
A steel thermos clattered to the floor in the corner and rolled, coming to a stop at Carly's feet. The host turned from Carly's question toward the back of the store, slow stepping closer to investigate. He walked through an aisle of sleeping bags hanging from the ceiling in an arc, like the dark mouth of a cave, and disappeared into the shadows. Carly held her breath, hugging the hatchet close to her chest. In the silence, both the sound of a struggle broke out. Someone was wrestling with the host. Fear immobilized Carly. She managed a single step toward the fight, but was unable to will herself any farther.
Help! Please!
More supplies fell from their shelves in the fight. Carly held still, transfixed by a silver-white glow, an otherworldly light reflecting off silver mylar ponchos on the far wall. Then a rack of maps toppled over and the host groaned and Carly pushed through the door to stumble outside. Suddenly, all was quiet. She heard nothing from inside the store. Had the host been hurt? Killed? Or was it all a ruse and the two were inside conspiring? their plot to rob the store playing out exactly as they wanted. Carly knelt on the sidewalk, her fingers tingling and chest heaving, when spinning beams drew her eyes up. What looked for a moment like lights from an approaching cop car were coming from much higher, from a ship on top of the parking garage. Carly could just make out the side paneling of a strange shuttle, very unlike a plane or helicopter. Some alien airship sitting right on top of the artist's "Land Here" mural. All at once, Carly felt an intense hunger overtake her like it had that day at the lake, and she knew without knowing that she wasn't alone. Slowly, Carly turned back toward the store and saw the intruder step through the door. It wasn't an alien, as she'd feared, but an astronaut, ghostly and skeletal. His spacesuit bore the same insignia as the suits from the Gemini mission she had read about as a girl. The astronaut lifted the visor of his helmet to reveal a radio in place of his face, its speaker broadcasting communication from the final Gemini flight, frantic ranting and ignored orders. Carly gathered from the crackling audio that this figure was neither of the men who returned to Earth changed, but a third astronaut from the flight, left behind by the spacecraft to pass away in space. Not man, not monster, but a ghost looking for permission to land, finding a kindred spirit in a lost girl, and an invitation in a graffiti mural.